Hello, and welcome back to Youth Code Jam's Online Bits and Bytes Club. We're going to be continuing with a coding activity today. This one will be done in Java, so it will require typing. We encourage any student to go ahead and give it a try, as this is a recorded part of the lesson. You can pause this and go at your own pace, and the activity sheet is available to you. So we do encourage students to go ahead and try this, even if they're not pro typers yet. Our targeted groups for this are 6th through 12th grade students, but again, any student is welcome to try it out and see what it is. This is what we call big kid coding, so it's kind of fun to see what you've done with your block coding and how that transfers to text coding later. So like you probably saw, this is available on our website. That will be at the top of the Bits and Bytes online page. So we'll have two things. We'll have the upcoming activity posted here. So this is the preview for this activity that we're going to do today. The registration link is right underneath that for the live lesson. And then after that you'll have, so this will be when we're done with the live lesson, the latest activity will come under here and be available at this spot, and there will be an activity sheet attached. We have translations in progress right now, so we'll be a little bit behind on these, but they will be available in English, and you can change the audio to Spanish subtitles in YouTube. But again, we are working on that, and I apologize that it's taking so long. If you keep scrolling, you'll be able to see the whole month's activities. So you'll see we had a Python activity at the beginning, and then we had Puzzle Club earlier this month in July. And we'll keep adding on here, and each month we'll clear this out so that it's just the current months, and it's not too overwhelming, and you'll get new things every month. But besides that, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is open a new tab and go to this site called Replit. So the fastest thing to do is just to type repl.it/languages/Java. And it's going to go ahead and bring you up to this new spot. You can create an account on here and it will save your work. It's not necessary for this at all, but if you do get a hang up, sometimes you will lose what you've typed so far, so it might benefit you to copy and paste this every so often into a text document if you want. It will work fine there, but again, not your biggest concern. So because I'm only doing this activity once, I'm not printing out the activity sheet, so I'm going to kind of split my window. So I'm going to squish down my browser here and pull this up over here in the corner. So I have my activity sheet here and I can look at it and switch back and forth between the screen, and this will help those who are using the activity sheet to follow along. So the first thing we're going to do here is delete line 3. So we're going to create other content in our, and I'm going to stretch out the code screen right now. We're going to create other content here. So we're going to delete line 3 just by highlighting it and then hitting the backspace button, or you can hit the backspace button a lot. But basically we're going to start with that one. And now we're going to go into step 1. So in step 1, we're importing something called classes. So everything in Java is a class of some sort. So our class right now is called main. That's just a default. That doesn't mean anything. It's different from the main function here. So the main function is where you put all your code to execute, and it's kind of the driving force behind your program. But that doesn't mean that you always put all your code there. It just means that's where your user interacts with the code that you want them to interact with. That's for another day, but just an overview. So this class name here could be anything. It doesn't have to be main, but we're just going to leave it like that. But we want to use a couple functions for this. We want to take in input, so we're going to need something called the scanner class, and that's what takes in input from, in this case, the keyboard. And then we're also going to add something called an input-output exception class, or an IO exception, and that's going to handle possible input or output errors that might occur when you're using a scanner class. So if you've done Java before, you might not always use this. The reason we're using this is because we're going to be taking in a lot of input, and if we don't have that exception, it gets kind of cranky with us because it's expecting certain behavior. So this exception kind of overrides that error and makes it so that we don't have to worry about it. There's better ways and more complicated ways to handle exceptions, but we're going to start with the most basic. So at the top of our page, we're going to hit enter twice. And on line 1, you're going to put import and then java.util.scanner semicolon and then import java.io and then exception, IO exception. And in Java, capitalization, punctuation, all that, that's all called syntax, and all of that matters. So if I had this as lowercase, I wouldn't be able to import the scanner. It would be an error. And if I missed a period here, it would be an issue. And same with not having the semicolon at the end of a line of code. That would cause an issue there too. So just make sure that when we're typing that our code matches what we have here in the document or what I have on my screen, because those things will cause problems and sometimes they're hard to spot. So the next thing we're going to do is click inside our code on line 6. So you can see it's already indented for me here. That's perfect. So we're going to go on line 2. Oh no, sorry. On step 2, we're actually going to use our exception clause, and we're going to use a throws clause, so that will automatically handle any errors that come in and prevent the program from crashing when it encounters an error. So at the end of this is called a function signature, right here, this whole line. At the very end of it, after the closing parenthesis of args, we're going to write the keyword throws and then IO exception. So that's going to handle most input-output, not all of them, but that will handle most input-output exceptions for us, and we won't have to worry about it for this activity. All right, so now we'll go on line 6, and again, that indent is there for us. And on line 3, we're going to create a scanner object. So instead of a variable, it's called an object because it's part of a new class and how we instantiate it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare it, which is give it its type. So it's a scanner object type. And then we're going to give it a name. So it's very common to use SC or input for scanner names. So I'm going to give it its name of SC, and then I'm going to instantiate it, which is giving it its value, or in this case, really creating it. So we're going to use the keyword new to create a new object, and then do scanner, open parentheses, and system in means we're looking for input from the keyboard. And then end that line with a semicolon. So system.in. Okay, so we have our scanner created. That squiggly line underneath just means we created something, but we haven't used it. We're getting to that part. So we have that created. The next thing we're going to do is ask for input from the user and then store it in the variable. So you can create variables in a few different ways. You can just go ahead and declare them. So we could have string name, or we can declare and instantiate like we did before. So you could have string name equals double quotes, my name is Jen, so let's go with my name. Most Java programs are not going to like just instantiating or declaring a variable. You'll get warnings a lot that you needed to declare it again or instantiate it with a value. That's not necessary, but you will get warnings in your code. So it's giving me this error line because I've used name twice, but that's okay because we're going to erase it. So, or we can give it a value here and then ask for the actual value from the user and write over it. But we're going to save us some time, and we're just going to ask for the information and then automatically store it into our variable. So the first thing we're going to use is a system.out print statement. So system is telling the computer system that we're going to print something out. We're going to have output, and we're going to print it to the console, which is what this is, so our console or screen. And if we just did print, it would print everything on the same line, no spaces, no anything. So it's pretty good practice just to go ahead and put print ln, which is print on a new line, and then enter your text in double quotes between those. So the first thing we're going to ask is enter your name, colon, space, and then semicolon, and then we're going to come down after that and declare string name equals, and this is how we're going to store it. We're going to use our scanner variable to read the next line. So the next line here, this built-in function for scanner and strings, that reads the next string. So anything that we read using next line has to be stored as a string variable. So we're going to use next line, semicolon. And if we want to go ahead and do a test, we can. Nothing's going to print out over here, but it will, well, that's not true. It'll print out this question and we can input our answer, but we won't see anything after that. So I'm going to press the green button. And it might take a second to load. Mine always seems to be a little slow. So enter your name, see it's on a new line. My name's going to be on a new line, and then the program ends because that's all we have. So we're going to repeat that step 2 more times because now we're going to ask for our, you can see we're going to ask for the age and our grade. And I did something in front of these. So this save time, I'm going to copy and paste this just by highlighting those 2 blocks of code and then coming down to line 9 and hitting enter or hitting paste. And right before this one, I added a special character. It's a \n. That adds an extra space. So even though I'm printing on a new line, that's going to add an extra space. Was that age? Yes. So between the areas, just so that it doesn't look so cluttered. That's a builder user preference, but when you don't, everything gets kind of smushed together and doesn't stand out. So I just added an extra line. And so we'll run this again so you can see what it does now. Just give it a second. There we go. So enter name, enter age. I'm going to make up an age. Actually, I will just use my real one. Okay, so you can see here, when we printed on a new line, the lines were stacked right on top of each other. When I added that special new line character, we get this nice empty space so that it doesn't all mush together. For some people, that's not going to matter. For some people, this extra space is really helpful so that they can see where they're at better. So this is personal preference. I'm going to keep them in here. Also, it's good practice to learn these special characters. If you're wondering why we stored age as a string instead of a number, it's because I'm not going to do any kind of math with the age, so I don't have to treat it like a number. But if I were, we could cast it to an integer or a whole number value later. So the last question we're going to ask for is the grade. And because we're storing this as a string, you will be able to enter like I'm a senior or I'm in 2nd grade. So you can enter words or numbers and it will treat it like a string no matter what. So we'll enter a grade here. And that will be our code. Yep. So let's test that out to make sure there's nothing weird going on. So Jen, 28, let's do junior. So you can see right here what I mean. With that new line character, I get this space. When I don't, it all stacks on top of each other like this. To me, that just starts to get messy and hard to see. So I'm going to come back before that last command line and add a new line character. So that's it, collecting our one-time basic variables, things that we only need one of. The next thing we're going to move on to is we're going to create an array. And an array is a variable type that stores a lot of objects in one. So you could store, you could have an array named colors and store different colors in there. And what it would look like is something like, let's do string. It would be string colors. And we would do, let's say we wanted to store 3 colors in there. And then we could do red. Oops. So whenever we're storing words or working with strings, we have to use quotes. So you can use single or double quotes normally. I have a habit of using double quotes, so that's why that's here. So that's kind of how you, if you wanted to hard code a value, we would do it that way. Oh, I don't have to tell it 3, I guess. So let's see if I'm remembering correctly, because we're not going to hard code. We're actually going to do something a little different. But if you want to hard code an array, you could do that. We're just going to test something real quick. Okay, so it didn't quit, so that means that's the right syntax for it. So I created a string colors. The square brackets tell the program it's going to be an array, and they have to go right after your variable name. And then I hard-coded the values in there, so I did red, orange, yellow. They're separated by commas and have quotes around each word. If you were just doing numbers, you could do, you wouldn't need the quotes if you're actually storing numbers in something. You just don't need it. But we're going to do something else here. So we are going to ask students to tell us their classes they're taking, and that's going to change for every student, right? So some students could be taking 4 classes, some could be taking 5 or 6, so it can change. So instead of having a preset array, we're going to ask for the number of classes and then instantiate the array using that information. So we're going to print the question. So I'm going to copy up here so you can practice typing. For length of this lesson, I'm going to use shortcuts with copy and paste when I can. So we're going to do system out print, how many classes are you taking? So that's what we're going to ask here. How many classes are you taking? Question mark. And then we're just going to come down to the next line, hit enter, and this time we are going to store it as a number, an integer value, so we're going to give it the data type of int, and then I'm going to name it num classes using camel case here. So that's when the word starts as a lowercase letter and then picks up for the second word at an uppercase. And I'm going to set it equal to sc next int. So it's going to collect the next number value and store it in a number value. And so after that, we don't need to talk to the user for a little bit. We're just going to store the string. We're going to instantiate the string classes, kind of like how we instantiated the scanner. So you're going to have, let's see, it's going to be string classes equals, again with the keyword new. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so in this case, we're putting the square brackets after the data type to tell it it's going to be a new array of strings. So because we're not going to hard code it, the square brackets go here when we declare an instantiate. So we're going to again repeat string, and then inside those square brackets we're going to put our variable num classes. So this allows us to change the size. Every time we run the program, we'll recreate all these variables and objects. And by setting this to a variable instead of a hard-coded number, we can change the size of the classes each time. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is use a for loop to ask the user, however many classes we said we have, we're going to ask the user to enter that number of classes. So we'll come down here and we'll use for, and then we're going to use a counter variable, and we can declare this inside of our loop. So we're going to name it int I equals 0. And if I is less than the number of classes, okay, increase by 1. So what's going on here is kind of a lot. So this is very similar to a while loop, but it puts all of this code in one line for us, and we don't have to keep track of it. So we start at I, which is our counter variable, and the reason we're starting I at 0 is because the first position in an array is at index 0 or position 0. So if we have 3 classes in an array, or we're telling it we're going to store 3 classes in the array, the first position is 0, so class 1 is stored at position 0, class 2 is stored at position 3, and class 3 is stored at position 2. So it's however many classes minus 1 is the max position numbers. And that's how most of coding works, is that we start counting at 0, and then it's always one less shorter. So once we start at 0, and so as long as 0 is less than 3, we can ask the question, and every time we ask the question, our I will increase by 1. So I'll start at position 0, and I'll say enter a class name, and I'll store that first class name at position 0. And then it will increase by 1, and I'll store the next class at position 1. And we'll increase by 1 again and go to 2. So I'll add the third class at position 2. And then 2 is going to increase to 3, which is not less than our number of classes, so the program's going to stop. So let's enter that code inside of there. So we're going to do system.out.println double quotes, new line, enter the name of a class, semicolon at the end, and then we're going to do the same thing we did above with a small change. So we're going to name it classes, and then we're going to use I as our variable for the position. Remember, so I is 0 here, so at position 0, so if I is 0, it would be like having at position 0, we're going to store this input here. And again, just use next line. And then when I increases to 1, it would be like 1 there, and we would store that in there. And then when it increases to 2, it would store it into the 2 index. So whatever I increases to here is what I equals to here. This coordinates to the position for us. So let's go ahead and run that and give it a shot so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Also see if we have any errors. So let's make up a character named Anne. And we're going to say she's 16 and she's a junior in high school. Let's say she's taking 6 classes. So there's an error that we might have to come back and look at. So enter the name of a class. I'm going to give English, Science, Algebra, U.S. History. Let's try and remember classes. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be 5, so maybe they're in gym class. And so it stops. So I have an error somewhere, if you've noticed, because it didn't collect that line. So what I need to go back and do is see what happened in our code and make sure everything matches up. So I have the print system out, number of classes, plus here. And sometimes things funny just happen in our code that don't make a lot of sense. But we're going to double check to make sure everything matches so far. So string classes, new string num classes in there. For int I equals 0, I equals less than number of classes, I plus plus, system.print.in. Okay, so this is one of those errors that can happen. So let's just run it again and see. And again, this is all mock information. You can enter yours if you want. It's not going to be stored anywhere. Let's do 7. How many classes are you taking? Let's do 3. So it did that again. So I'm going to continue with this and then come back and see why it might be doing that. I think it has something to do with input-output errors. So I'll have to go back and look at something. Because it should start at 0 and let us enter that. So we can come back and play with that code in a minute. But we're going to continue on to the print statement. So what we're going to do next is create a function to print a report. And so we're just going to come down here for now, and it's not going to return anything, so we're just going to call it. So we're going to type print report, and then we're going to pass all of our variables to it. So we're going to pass our name, age, grade, classes, or actually, hold on, let's do num classes, and then classes, and then semicolon. And then we're going to stay inside the main class, but we're going to come outside our public function. So this closing bracket down here, we're going to hit enter twice, and we're going to give it, it's going to be a public function, which means it's going to be accessible to this class and any class that ties in or connects to this class and anything in this class. So it's available to everything. Static, that just means we can use it without instantiating an object to connect to it. I know we used an object before, but it's not quite the same here, so we use static so that we don't have to instantiate anything of that. Void is the data type. It means we're not returning anything. And then we're going to give the name print report. And Java very much likes to know all the time about the data types, so we have to basically declare them in the parameters here. So we do string name, string age, string grade, And these have to be typed in the order they're passed in. So I couldn't put string age here. It would cause an issue. So I have to do it in the order I passed it in. And then int num classes, and then string classes. And then at the very end, you add the square brackets to let it know that we did pass an array and that we meant to pass an array. And then inside of here, we're going to use a bunch of print statements and a couple special characters. So I'm just going to copy and paste one from up here and then change the content inside. So system.print, I did in, so here in all caps I put student report. And then another system in, and we're going to put student name. We're going to erase this. We don't need that special character for this one. So we're going to put student name, and then we're going to concatenate or connect a string and a variable. So I'm going to type in the plus sign and name here. And I'm going to do that for the next two variables. So we're going to do, whoops. So then we're going to do student age and put age in the variable spot. And then the last one we're going to do is student grade and put grade in the variable spot. And then just like before, we're going to use a for loop to iterate through the array, because we won't know how many classes we have each time we run it. So the for loop is the best way to handle the user-defined array size. We don't even have to worry about it. It will just accept variables. So as long as I is less than the num, which is why we pass num classes, is because we want it to print all of the classes. So we're going to do that. And then system out print. And this time I'm going to add 2 tabs in there. So that's what that \t is, a single tab, and 2 is going to be 2 tabs. And then I'm just going to put classes I. And remember, I corresponds to the index position. So when we're on 0, we'll print the first one, and when we're on 2, it will print the third one that's in there. And then finally, we're going to do a system out println end of report message. And I think I added an extra line there. Okay, so we're going to give this a try, and then I'm going to see if I can go back and figure out why we're skipping a line there. Doesn't really make sense that that's happening. So I'm going to stop the program, and we're going to run it again. Okay, so we have an error somewhere, and that would be because I added an I on my last print statement, so I don't want that. Okay, we're going to try that again. Okay, so we have one more. Plus classes I. Okay, so it's not liking that. Let's see. Cannot find symbol classes. Why not? Because I have a typo up here. So Java checks everything to see if it finds a syntax error or a user error in that case. And then when we're running it, it can also run into runtime errors. So we're going to do English, Algebra. So for some reason, our program is skipping that very first line. And I'm not sure why, because our code matches everything that we did before. But let me go copy and paste our backup code that I have saved for us. Here it is. Hold on, my computer's having a moment. There we go. So I'm going to copy and paste this. This was my test code. And there might be something I've messed up here. So I'm just going to comment out what we've done so far and paste over with the example code. Okay, so J 12, 13, 3. Okay, so enter the name of a class: English, Algebra, Physics. So you can see here, student report, name J12 for age 13. For grade, I just inputted random stuff. Student class list, so I had that line in there, that was a little different. And then end of student of report. So let's do a quick comparison between this code and what we typed to see what happened. No, we don't want that. I want the text editor. So I can bring that up here. And this is good debugging. It's not great that this didn't work, obviously, but this is good debugging or code checking to make sure that things match up. So we're going to start at the top and go line by line. So we have import java.util, which is short for utilities.scanner. So we don't have an issue here. Java.io exception. That's not an issue. Class main. All of that looks good. SC, that matches. So I just threw some comments in there. That was for me during development. It's not crucial to you guys. So string name, yep. That matches so far, that matches so far. All right, so let's look at setting up our array. So we asked them, how many classes are you taking? We stored that. Okay, so I did something different here, which could be, we can try that. So at first I stored it as a string and then changed it. And we can see if that does anything. Sometimes when you read things in, there are issues for print, but other than that, I'm not seeing anything that should have caused an issue for us. So we can try that way. So instead of having int num class, we can store it as a string and then parse it to an integer and see if that does anything different. It could also just be that the compiler is not. Here we go. Oh, I think I still have both in here. Hold on. Okay, it could just be that the compiler is being particular about something. Code is always fun. Enter your name, enter your age, 7, 3. Okay, so I think that was the problem, is that the program today was not liking skipping this step. So if yours had that same problem where it skipped the first one, go ahead and store your string as a number. So you're going to input it as a number and store it as string, and then we're going to input the class. We're going to create an int num classes variable and then parse it or cast it to an integer from a string. And that will fix the problem. So it's giving us an exit status because I forced it to end. But other than that, it's fine. That extra line, if you guys want that student list, which I don't think it's in the activity sheet, but if you want the students class list, you can come here. You'll just add another system out print line and add students class list above that. But that's it. Again, that wasn't crucial for the program to run, but this part was. So if you guys were having that problem where it was skipping the first, it wasn't letting you enter the first class, go ahead and go back and change our input line to change it to a string and change it to num, and then do the integer parse value, and that should fix it. Other than that, that's it for the basic activity. If you want, you can keep practicing with Java and you can try some of these adventure modes down here. So you can ask the user for a grade to go with each class. So that would be using another array and honestly a couple for loops. It's doable, but it is challenging. So you can also look up how you might do that. You could write a function that prints the class name and a particular index value. So again, you would enter the name and search for it in the index, and search for it in the array using the name, or enter a index value and see if anything prints out. So there's a couple ways you can do that. And you can ask the user, if you want to practice adding variables and collecting information, you can ask the user for something else and create your own variable. But other than that, sorry for the hiccup today. Those happen with programming, and sometimes the compiler's just not in the mood to use a certain way. So, but that's all we have. Next week, we will be working only in Make Code Arcade. So just a heads up, we'll have 2 new lessons for Make Code Arcade stuff, and then, we'll have Make Code Arcade next week, and then the following week we'll have something different. And just stay tuned, we'll have new activities announced on social. But I hope to see you guys again.